So what I'm going to talk about today is how to live a creative life. How to live a creative life. How many of you know what a hamburger essay is? Hamburger essay. I see some hands. It's kind of like a sandwich essay. How many of you have heard a sandwich essay? Sandwich essay. So a hamburger essay, or a sandwich essay, is supposed to be an essay in which you have your intro, which is your first slice of bread, then you have the toppings, then you have the substance of your essay, which is supposed to be the meat, and also the bottom bun. So that's supposed to be how you write a hamburger essay. Now, when I was in high school, Mr. Shaughnessy gave us a handout. He was my English teacher, that said, here's how to write a hamburger essay. It had a picture of a hamburger on it. And I thought to myself, boy, that looks really dumb. I don't want to write. Who wants to write a hamburger essay? So I went to the cafeteria where I found one of those magazines, those ones with acne medication ads all through it. And I turned to the closest essay that I could find, and I wrote my grade 11 English hamburger essay that wasn't really a hamburger essay based on this essay that I just found in this magazine. I handed in to Mr. Shaughnessy, and when he handed it back, I noticed that there was only one line written across the top. And it was, "Ray, you really didn't follow the rules." So I had to mark it holistically. Here's an A+. I've thought about that since. Since then, I've become a teacher myself, and I teach people how to write. One of my colleagues once asked his students to surprise him. He said, "Give me anything, surprise me." And one student handed in an animation. This is an essay writing class. That student handed in an animation. And my colleague thought to himself, how am I going to grade this? I don't have the tools. I'm supposed to be an expert in this class, but I don't have the tools to grade this. And to his credit, he struggled and struggled, and he came up with new rules. In that moment, he hit the pause button on him having to be an expert. And he went to where that animation was, where that essay was. He got into the head of the student, and he was able to pull out a new set of rules, something that he could learn from. And that was how he was able to step aside for a moment as a teacher. Now, those of you in the room who might happen to be teachers, we can have all sorts of idealistic senses of what it is that we're doing when we're at the front of a classroom. But make no mistake, we're also gatekeepers. Let me talk about gatekeepers for a second. When you have a stack of assignments in front of you, you're supposed to put a few of them into the A pile, a few more into the B pile, and more, and so on. They've got a term for this. It's called a grading curve. When the class is big enough, then it's supposed to be statistically possible. But in that moment, the teacher is a gatekeeper. The teacher is working under this sense that there are scarce resources, as if she or he were an economist. Scarce resources. And the resources here are A's, B's, C's. And what that translates into later on are jobs, resumes, CVs. It does have an economic impact. So we are gatekeepers, teachers. Now, I want to take you down a different route. This is me when I was 7. Oh, well, okay. The person on the left is me. The person on the right is my sister. And she was the one who taught me about teaching. When she was born, she taxed my patience as a 7-year-old. For my birthday, I got a Transformer toy. It was a giant robot about that big. And the day after I got it for my birthday, she sat on it. And she broke it in half. When I was 7, I would want to play chess with my dad. And we would play. And then my sister would come along, and she would want to play chess with me. And my dad would say, "Play chess with your sister." And then he would step away from the board, and I would be disappointed. I would say, "How can I play chess with my 1-year-old sister?" That was a tough year. After that year, she grew up really quickly. She became very mature, very serious. Not all serious people are mature, and not all immature people are whatever. Anyway. My sister was a great sister after that point. Our personalities developed together, and there was no more sibling rivalry, and I began to see her as a peer, even though we were 7 years apart. And I knew to myself that if my sister and I, 7 years apart, could see each other eye to eye and respect each other, then I knew that one day I would want to be a parent. And this is how I would want to raise my kids. I'm not a parent. But that feeling that I had when I was 8 years old, that I realized I wanted to be a parent one day, and this was how I was going to treat my kid as a peer, is the feeling that I carried with me when I got into teaching. I would look out over a lecture hall of people, and I would think to myself, every person in this lecture hall is much more complex than I can ever imagine at the front of this room. Each of you have experiences, knowledges that I could never predict, and that would never fit into this box that we call student, us teachers. And that you bring knowledges to the room that I could never predict. And what I do, what I teach at the front of the class, has a lot to learn from the knowledges of the people in the room. The people in the room right now are a unique mix that will never be in this room ever again. That's the thing that I would have to bring with me every time I stood in the front of a lecture hall. Now, there was once when I was teaching in a context like this one, and I must have been giving a lecture, but one of my teaching assistants was sitting at the back of the room and was looking out over the audience and realized that there were people with their laptops open, playing video games, watching sports, on Facebook. And the teaching assistant said to me, "Oh, can you believe that? People playing video games in your lecture?" And I thought to myself, you know, maybe there's something in that. I'm supposed to be teaching art. I'm supposed to be teaching creativity, but there's something that someone in the room would much rather do that they consider more interesting. One of my TAs, one of my teaching assistants, happened to know how to make video games. He had spent time in the video game industry. So what we ended up doing was that we ended up having a bit of a contest. Students would send in scripts for video games. The most inventive video game, the one that was most executable, we would program. And on the last day of class, we projected that video game in the lecture hall, and we played it. This work of art that one of the students had created in the class. That was how my discipline, my art form, the thing that I was supposed to be up there as an expert in, that's what I was able to learn from that student and all the other students who were playing video games, watching sports, on their laptops, on Facebook. Now, one of the things, as I've mentioned, is that I like to think about just how complex all of us in the room are. And one of the things that I want to suggest when we're answering the question of how to live a creative life is to think about what we have in front of us, all of us, as a work of art. How can the classroom be a work of art? How can the classroom be something that we can create together? I also ran a magazine, and when we all sat around the table, I realized to myself something about creative leadership. We were all sitting around the table, and we had all this material that was the material that we had been printing. You know, this is the stuff that would go into the magazine and has gone into every single issue up until this point. And we dutifully went around the table and we said, this is good, this not so good, we're going to put it in this pile. This gets the A's, this gets the B's, this gets the C's. But then, partway through the meeting, we realized this isn't the magazine that we want to read. Why are we going through the motions of making a magazine that even we don't want to read? One person held up the magazine and said, you know, when I joined, this wasn't the magazine that we were printing, but this is the magazine that we're printing now, and I don't even read it. So, what we realized was that we were going to make a magazine from the ground up, one in which all of us around the table were not imagining what someone else wanted, but what we wanted around the table. That was all we could count on. And instead of me being the authority figure at the top, saying what people should read, or the teacher in the front of the classroom saying, this is what you have to know. Instead, we as a group built something new from the ground up. To me, creative leadership sometimes means stepping aside as the expert. That's a difficult thing, I think, because education systems train people to be experts in a field. The entire culture is built around expertise. I'm supposed to be an expert. Otherwise, why am I at the front of the room? And that's something that I take really seriously. Why am I at the front of the room? When each of you has knowledges that I would never know about. Okay, so if creative leadership sometimes means stepping aside as the expert in order for us to collectively build a new work of art, one in which the classroom is collectively co-created, or our organization or our business is collectively co-created, then what does that mean for all of us and the way that we think about ourselves? We no longer have one person at the top who is able to dictate everything. Now, I remember in high school, there was my drama teacher, Mr. Castleman. And Mr. Castleman said to me, he pulled me aside one day, and he said, "Ray, are you willing to starve for your art?" And when I looked into his eyes, I could tell that he wanted me to answer a certain way. And I thought about it. And I said, no, I'm not willing to starve for my art. And he was disappointed. I don't remember what happened after that, but I did remember that interaction long after the fact. I thought about the fact that I refused to starve for my art. And I realized what I should have said back then, now. I should have said, no one should starve for their art. No one should starve. If we are going to figure out how we belong together as a classroom, as an organization, this we is our greatest work of art. The way that we imagine ourselves belonging together. If we can imagine a way that I and others don't need to act like grades are scarce resources, with a few people getting this and a few people getting that and some people getting this, if we can imagine a new way of relating to each other, this we could be our greatest work of art. And I think this is my answer so far as to how to live a creative life. Because if I am going to think about how I am going to live a creative life, it means that I have to think about the position that I occupy at the front of this stage and what all of you do when you're sitting here listening to me. We can imagine something together, and I think this we will be our work of art. Thank you.